What does your crazy neighbor do to be labeled the crazy neighbor? Had severe anger issues and yelled at anything or anyone he didn't like on the street. A few years ago, he had a road rage incident, and when he started banging on the other car's windows, the occupants got out and beat him badly. During this, he had a heart attack and now barely has enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back. Also, he doesn't yell anymore. My sister's neighbor reported my sister to the police because her kids were playing in my sister's garden. Not for the usual reasons, too much noise, etc. No, because a volcano in Italy had erupted and the radiation would hurt them. My sister lives in the UK. He jumped in front of my car while I was driving down the road to yell at me for going through his trash at night. Told him it was probably raccoons. He refuses to believe it to this day. She has a penchant for going around sticking nails in people's tires at night. This has happened dozens of times to nearly everyone on the street, though she's slowed down since more people started installing video cams and motion sensor lights in their driveways. My neighbor sits in his yard, hides behind his plants, and meows at people who pass by. He is not dangerous at all, but he is not right in the head either. His caretakers are his parents, and they seem to be very nice people. His dad once told me he just likes to be a cat, and left it at that. I didn't ask any more questions. I'm the whole president. I get elected over and over again, because I just focus on things like making sure the buildings are safe and maintained, that the grounds are reasonably cared for, or the pool is working. I had some guy come in, and was all gung-ho about fixing all the things that were wrong. So I said, here, take the job. I don't have a lot of free time anyway. So, he takes his ear term and basically runs it like the stereotype. Everyone is annoyed. I'm still in the board, so I stop the things I can, but we have a couple other obnoxious busybodies on the board. So, I orchestrate a coup. I basically make sure the busybodies on his side don't get re-elected to the board, and then get myself voted back in. He sued me. I think his attorney thought I would just back down. I keep an attorney on retainer, because of various reasons. My attorney got the whole thing thrown out in such a way I could sue the costs, so I did. I then went back to running things the way I always did, except I fined him for every little thing I could for like a year. That was super petty, but he sued me. The old lady who lived below me left me multiple cryptic letters blaming me for the birds chirping too loudly in the mornings. Not pet birds. The sparrows and shit outside. This went on for months. For a brief period, I had a bird feeder. I took it down after a few months after multiple cryptic letters. Eventually, management got involved and took her side, even though bird feeders were explicitly allowed per the lease. There were several trees nearby, including one that literally hung onto both her and my balconies. I assure you that birds existed before I set up the feeder, as they continued to exist after. My sister and Bill took over the lease 4 years ago, and they still get the occasional note from Bird Lady. Apartment management has even inspected their unit to verify there's no bird feeder or any other bird luring devices. I found one of the notes. Again, your bird dodo is on my railings, bird seeds on my porch and chairs, and your birds are ruining my night rest. Wee hours of the morning, birds in your feeder chirping. The bird feeder was gone at this point. Called the police on people, parked perfectly legal in front of their house, took pictures of my partner's dad just working in the yard, disappeared suddenly without a trace, and then suddenly came back home in the dead of night, 8 months later. Weirdos. He eats my flowers. In his defense, he told us that he had been doing it for years when he introduced himself, after we bought the house. He also brought over frozen cookies in a plastic bag as a housewarming gift, but wasn't sure what was in them. We share a side yard, and he is a really great neighbor. Just an older, quiet guy, who keeps to himself and eats my flowers. Comes over to my yard and eats the lilies raw, or brings scissors and clips the heads to boil and make jam. I thought that his particular foraging was interesting and quirky, so I planted a couple raspberry, blackberry, and blueberry bushes 3 years ago, when we first moved in, on the side yard we share. I told him to help himself to berries anytime, especially before the birds do. The bushes have all gone insane, and the entire side of my house is now a summer berry haven for us to share. Having a decent relationship with the guy I share a property line with is worth some dead-headed flowers. My neighbor was an 85-year-old widow that lived alone. She had 2 vehicles, a car and a truck, and over the course of a few months, I realized that she was no longer parking her car in her garage like she had for the many years prior to that. Then suddenly the truck wasn't being parked inside the garage either. Turns out she no longer had room in her garage to park her vehicles, because she was walking down to a residential construction site about a block away every evening, and she'd grab 2 2x4s and bring them home. She had over 500 boards stacked in her garage, and when she was questioned on what she was going to do with it, she didn't have an answer. Bonus crazy neighbor stories. I drove 16 hours straight, pulled in my drive, and crashed on my couch immediately. Must have left the garage door open, because I woke up to the neighbor lady shaking me to see if they missed my newspaper delivery that morning also. The neighbor lady thought I didn't clean up after my dog in her front yard. I had never owned a dog, so she retaliated by walking around the neighborhood with a garbage bag, picking up every bit of dog poo she could find, and dumped the said bag of dog poo on my front lawn, while I was standing in the front window watching. Ran up over $300 on 1 month's water bill of mine, because the neighbor lady was hooking her sprinkler up to my water when I'd leave for work in the morning, and would let it run all day until right before I got home from work. She would put up an ugly orange snow fence between our yards in the fall to keep my leaves out of her yard. Me pointing out that I only had pine trees did not dissuade her from the decision to leave the snow fence up. Day 1, I should have known something was fishy with this lady. Literally, day 1. I closed on my house at 9 a.m. and had a roofing company at the house waiting for the call that I close. We spent the day ripping off the old layers and getting bundles up on the roof for the next day. It was hot out, we were exhausted, and all were sitting in the front yard cooling off when the neighbor lady walked out of her house, down the sidewalk to my house, and without even acknowledging the 6 of us staring at her, she walked in the front door and had herself a look-see. She hated dandelions. I found this out the first year that I lived there when I noticed that my lawn was dying off in an extremely weird way, almost as if someone was spraying weed killer on the stream setting trying to snipe dandelions from 20 feet away. That's literally what she was doing. Being the nice guy I am, I would clean her driveway off in the winter because I had a snowblower. She would never thank me in person, but instead, she'd come over to my house after I had finished and would leave a bag on my front door that usually contained whatever expired goods she had in her pantry. Some of the standouts for me were like a dozen cans of 10-year expired Chef Boyardee stuff and, once, a half a bag of wheat flour. We had one a while back that had a meth lab in the home. Crazy fights, yelling at all hours of the night. Dude would wander around the hut tweaked out crazy, and once he threw a Molotov cocktail out of the 2nd floor window at another dude who was smashing up his car, screaming, "I'll fucking kill you, motherfucker." Those were interesting times. Had a neighbor who wouldn't let anyone use his driveway because he didn't want it to get dirty. Anyone including himself. He parked on the street outside. If he thought you were having a party, he would drag a bunch of plastic bags full of God knows what to the end of his driveway, so no one could turn around it. One time I came home, and he was outside hosing it down in the rain. To his credit, I've never seen a cleaner driveway. This older lady lives across the street from me, and she is obsessed with leaves falling on her lawn. To the point that she will come out of her house and pick up one individual leaf off the grass in the fall, or any other time. She spends hours a day outside with the leaf blower in full. She will go and knock on other neighbors' doors if she thinks you have too many leaves on your grass. She'll come over into your yard and do it herself if you're not home. What I think is weird is that she's in her 70s, no kids or grandkids living with her, and lives alone in a pretty large 4-bedroom house with an amazing in-ground pool in the backyard, with a slide and diving board and everything. Nobody has used that pool in at least 5 years, yet she opens it up every summer. Somehow she likes my family, and has never once yelled at us about our leaves, and randomly brings things over like half-eaten gallons of ice cream, and asks if we want it, because she's not using it. The next door lady was standing on her driveway yelling at me, because acorns had fallen from a large oak tree on my property onto the said driveway, demanding that I cause the tree to cease and desist from this intentional criminal activity. Used to live in a little town of 300 people, where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely look near our garbage can outside and take the recyclable bottles and cans we would leave for her. After we cleaned out a fish tank, we put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left them on top of the garbage can because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys hollered at me while I was outside to come over as she wanted to show me something. She had taken that bag we had left and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she wasn't real confident that they would make it, but so far, they seemed to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. We bought a house, and on the day, while we were unloading the first truckload, the neighbor came into our garage uninvited and started telling us what trees on our property he wanted us to cut down. Not the craziest, but the fucking audacity of some people. I used to live in Inhoa. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and I. He sent a letter to us saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day, at the same cut height, and in the same pattern, to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut on different days, and in opposite patterns, just to annoy the guy. Well, I used to have a neighbor who was legitimately mentally ill, although I don't know his actual diagnosis. His truck wouldn't start one day, dead battery, and he told everyone on the street that another neighbor was stealing the electricity. He knew this because of the way this guy parked his vehicle. Obviously, it was sucking electricity from the ground for his battery, which drained the car batteries near him. Many times, he would run down the street and warn everyone to hide their valuables because Japan was invading the country. He wasn't on drugs, but he did take medication for his mental illness, and everyone on our street could tell when he stopped taking it. Whenever he would start saying completely irrational things, we would remind him to take his medication, and he would thank us and go home, presumably to take it. He lived alone, and he was getting older, so I think he had a hard time remembering to take it. There were many more incidents. Ada, thanks for the rewards. I've never gotten any before this post. When I first moved in, my neighbor walked into the house, unannounced. When my wife gets home, sometimes she wants to stay in her car having a phone conversation. He will come out and walk down the side of his house, checking his sprinkler controls, and looks at my wife. He has 2 huge bushes he refuses to cut. It blocks our view of backing out of our driveway. The fire department came by to clear trees and bushes around the fire hydrants. The neighbor came out and yelled at the fireman. This bush is older than you. Needless to say, I hope there are no house fires. We used to live next to a woman that would have a disco party for her cats in her backyard at 2 a.m. every few days. She would put up a disco ball and party lights with music playing. It was a little bit odd, but what made it crazy was her dancing like a Native American performing a ritual around the disco ball. It's honestly one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed.